working a miniature part too. Today we're going to do some actual tooling, and I have cut out some leather jockeys in 1.5 to 2 ounce leather so that we can get the feel of what it's like working in the proper scale. Because tooling can push the leather out of shape, you can use packing tape and put the leather on top of it before working it if you choose to, and that'll help keep it in shape. I generally do not do this myself, but it's an excellent idea for keeping the piece in the right shape. To get started, let's talk about the edge work. And for the start, that would be stitching. You can see in the image that stitching is really only required around the leather skirts and any other areas where two pieces of leather are joined. However, in custom saddles, you'll find a lot more stitching, as you can see in the image. For our piece, I'm going to stitch all the way around the leather jockey. And to do that, probably first dampen the leather, and then taking a pounce wheel, pushing the feet medium to heavy weight, we're going to work evenly, even distance around the edge. Oops. Again, I'd work much more carefully when not being videoed. And there's our stitching. From there we can work in, but you want to get the edge work done first. For this next section, we're just going to work on the border. Again, when working on leather and tooling leather, it's good to make sure it's good and damp. Take a sponge, and rub it in. You can do it front and back. Have it ready to go. And while you're working, if it dries out, add a little more water. You don't want it soaking, but you want to make sure it's damp. Now, when you're working in such fine leather, you want to make sure you don't use a hammer too hard, because then it's going to start showing in the backside. Some tools you don't need a hammer at all or a mallet at all, some you do. So let's try this edge. I'm going to work around this piece with just a light tap. Work all the way around. Trying to keep the same distance between the edge and the tool. Now you can practice with your pressure to make sure that you get the right amount of indent. Now with the edging tool, you may want to go the second time around, which is not easy on these curves. I mean, sometimes you might not be able to, and on this one, I think it would be difficult. But if you did, you have to be very careful to make sure it lines up all the way around. And I would recommend very good lighting as well, so that you're going to get this edge piece. Now with this, I don't think that's going to turn, this tool is going to work very well around that edge. However, there's areas that edge would work well in a saddle. So when you're designing your saddle, you have to make sure the tool you're using is going to work for the curves and the scale that you have. So that would look nice running down the fender. Another edging idea is to take a swivel knife and mark your design, going carefully, obviously not where I'm doing it here, I'm just looking for space. Creating your pattern with a knife, and then taking a marker, a fine tip marker, pushing down, follow that line. You can also do it by opening up the line to get inside there. That takes a little bit of practice, but it can have quite a nice look when you're done. So let's talk about doing an overall pattern. This is probably the easiest way to tool your saddle. What I would recommend is finding a tool that looks nice in a small scale, and then creating a bit of a grid so that you have something to work along to keep it even. So get your tool and lining it up. Be consistent about where you put your pattern. You'd like it to be even distance apart and work all the way along and then all the way down, and it covers the entire piece. I'll be back in a sec. You can see with this, I've been practicing doing closer together, further apart to see what I liked. And again, it depends on the tool and what you want. Practice until you get how you like it. But that's a good way of covering surface quite quickly. And obviously, the more time and patience you take, the better it will look. So before we begin carving, I want to introduce you to how to work with a knife. And this is a very tough tool to use, so I would recommend practicing it with quite a bit. So what you need to do is practice on preferably a leather of the same scale that you're using for your saddle. When you're tooling, it's important to case the leather or get it wet. With this really fine leather, thin leather, 1.5 to 2 ounces, it doesn't need much water at all to case. So if it just dries out, dampen it again. For the knife, you're going to put your index finger on the top, and that's going to push down. Your middle finger is going to do the pull, and your middle finger and thumb steer. So it's just, because of the swivel, you can do all sorts of shapes. So what I would recommend is starting with doing a C, a simple C. Do it larger, practice that a lot, then do it a little smaller, and then smaller, and see how small you can get it. And just practice that over and over again. Next, when you have a C, do one C, and then a C in the reverse direction. And that's how you make a circle. Again, practice it, start larger, and work smaller. Practice, practice, practice. Then you're going to want to practice S's, one direction and the other direction. And you want to be able to get them the same size. Dog hairs. I'm not wonderful at this either, but again, it's harder to do with a video. So I practice curves, S's, C's. You never do a full circle. It's always a half C and then another half a C. And if you're doing a scroll, what you do is a C that kind of gets bigger, and then you hook up to the top again, and you do another C that gets smaller, and so on. Work small bits at a time. And one of the other skills you want to practice is just lines, either straight or curved. With the line, I suggest starting harder down and ending with a bit of a taper. So hard and then soft. And that gives a more natural look. So there's one that's straight without the same level of pressing, and then one that's tapered. So straight, then tapered. You can see taper has a much more natural look to it. So before you do any real saddle carving, I'd recommend practicing circles, C's, S's, and just try to get smaller and smaller. Start large, get smaller. The next tool that you need to practice with, and this is one of the tools I use the most, is a beveler. What this does is push down the leather. You want to go, any lines that are carved, you need to push down. You don't want to leave a line as is. So you just push along the leather. And notice I'm not using a mallet. This leather is too soft. If I use a mallet, I'm going to go right through it. You can push down, and you can even give it a bit of a sweep to give it another look, but I prefer just to go for pushing down. thing with this too is it can create its own patterns if you're doing small, tiny little pieces. You want to practice that as well. Just make a little circle just using your beveler. That gives it the background. So when you bevel with a line, you want to figure out what part of the leather stands up. So I beveled along that side, and then I'm going to bevel along this side. And again, do the second piece too. So you can see what this does is it raises the sections against the beveler and creates a background. And that's a good tool to practice with. You should also practice any other tools you have. So say I have a backgrounder here, which is very important. And I have carved and I have beveled this little tiny piece. So what I'm gonna do is practice the beveling tool. The background tool, sorry. What this should do is for all the background, it just pushes it down a little more and gives it an even look. So I'm using the points to get into tight places, and I'm filling in any areas that are actually background. So just practice with any extra tools you have so that you become used to using them. Now the background tool should just be moved around until it looks consistent, and it shouldn't look like the actual shape of the tool. Once you've practiced your tooling, you might want to try some color. So where the background is, take a fine tip paintbrush and a little bit of leather dye and lightly fill in the areas that you have that you've put the background tool on. You can do it fully dark or light. If it's lighter, it looks more like antiquing opposed to painting. One thing I didn't mention in the tools section is the transfer paper. And again, this came from Rio Rondo. Now, in Rio Rondo patterns, there is actually a tooling design. So I've copied this tooling design by tracing it with a pencil onto this surface. Now, to get that onto the leather, what you're going to do is dampen the leather and take a pencil, and what I'm going to do is just put the one section of flower there. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to go around and transfer that with the pencil, at least to get an idea of what it's like. You can see now that the first part of the design is right there, ready to go. I did a little more work to it, a little more detail. Not really that much, since it is a damaged piece of leather that I'm not going to use, just practice. And now I'm going to add some basket weave to it. So, using my scribe, and I'm going to put it on an angle, I am going to draw or mark a line. And with the basket weave tool, starting at one end, I'm going to push one down. Then I'm going to take another line at that distance and mark an equal line. And I'm going to do that all the way over so that this is a grid. Now that I have a grid, I'm going to use my mallet, since this basket weave tool needs a little extra. And I'm going to work this tool, lining up along that line, meeting the choice distance. You have a choice. You can meet right at the very end here or slightly over. Keep it consistent. And when you get to an edge, just roll the tool slightly in the direction so that it fades off into the end. Now I'd recommend doing this right underneath your nose so you can see it, not out in front like I'm doing, because you have to mark it right along these lines for it to work nicely. Carving 6. So I've done this. It didn't take too long to do. I would probably take a lot longer and be more careful if I was doing it for my actual saddle, but still looks pretty good. So you've got your design here, and you've got your basket weave. And then if you want, you could put a border around the outside or bevel it to finish it off. Your choice depending on the design. But you can combine different designs in their saddle. Now I'm going to try a piece that's going to be similar to what I want to do for my own saddle. So I have cut of the exact same leather, the piece. I've done the stitching marks, and I've hammered in where the outline will be for my silver. Now what I'm going to do is, using the few tools that I've got here, I'm just going to use a beveler, the knife, and the background tool. I'm going to attempt something with flowers and leaves and see how it looks, to see if that's what I want. So I'm going to start by putting some flowers in. And I think I'll put one maybe there, and there, and there, and there, and there, and there. So I'm going to put those on, and then I'm going to work around it. So to use my flowers, I'm just going to do what I did before with this little tool. I'm going to place in some points. And then I'm going to fill those, or connect those points with my beveler. And once I do that, I will come back. So after playing around with my design idea, I kind of liked just doing the flower with the beveler. So I beveled around lines that don't even exist, because we just find, and then I can shape the flower after. Just make it a little smaller, or pull it out, or more detailed, just by using this beveler, pushing it down. So if I look at that, I have the start of my pattern. So from there, I am now going to say, well, where do I want my leaves? What's that going to look like? So let's pull out the knife and put on some leaves here. So I've tried designing on the computer and then trying to put it on, but with this form of detail, level of detail, I find I just cannot get the pattern from the computer to transfer and work properly. So I like to build it a little bit at a time. Again, you can always transfer the pattern, do it that way. So now I've got my leaves, I'm going to bevel those. So I've beveled the leaves, and now I'm going to use the beveler to add some shape into the leaves. Just to add a little bit of extra, make them look more like leaves. Missed that one. And with a knife, I'm going to add some veins. Again, at this scale, you have to be very careful not to overdo it. You can add a little bit more later as you go, a little more stuff. And now I'm going to try to add some shape. Now, with leather carving, it's always nice to have curves. Curves are what they use. So I'm just going to add some curves as I go. And the one thing, you don't want to overlap any of your lines. And I'm just going to get the basics of my curves here. Work around the silver nicely. So I've got some curves happening here. Once I've got the curves, I'm going to use the beveler and work that in. And if I need to add another line, I will probably either add it, I can add it with the knife, or I can just bevel another line right next to it, like that. So just another line like that. And I'll work on that for a bit. So I've poked and prodded around on this for quite some time. Well, not that long. And what I've been trying to do is fill in the blanks, any blank areas, and give it a bit of a round shape. Just want to get the feel to see how that goes. So if you can see, the silver will go there, and you have a pattern. Now, I would just keep working that, filling in blank areas. And what I would recommend is looking online and really having a look at patterns, and check out videos on carving full size, full scale. What we're trying to do is mimic the overall look. We're not trying to copy it, because there's no way we can get as many lines in as you do in full scale. So what you're trying to do is get the overall look when it's sitting on a model horse. And one good thing to do, one thing I'd recommend, is taking photographs of it, because that's what you're going to see a lot of times. That's what the final product is going to look like. So what does it look like up close, and what does it look like from the distance that you would actually see it if you were, say, judging a model horse, or if it's on your shelf. So to become good at this, it takes a lot of practice. It's not really that hard to do. It just takes learning the flow of how the carving goes, and not trying to be perfect, because there's no way you can do it. You want the look of the flowers. You want the look of the leaves or the feathers. You can't actually carve completely detailed unless you actually purchase a stamp with a flower or a stamp with an acorn. So we're just trying to get the look in this video.